Thanks for joining us for Cultivating Cut Flowers with Amy Lentz. My name is Katie Dunker. I'm the Master Gardener Statewide Coordinator. Happy to host today. Let me tell you a little bit more about our presenters. Amy is a Colorado State University Extension agent in horticulture, agriculture, and small acreage management in Weld County, where she works with residents and local farmers to address their questions and needs as they relate to land management, home horticulture, and crop production. Amy also helps manage the Colorado Master Gardener Program in Weld County, educating and helping volunteers deliver home-based horticultural information to the public. Prior to working for CSU, Amy worked as a research analyst at the University of Kentucky. And you might hear some of that in her accent. She has a little Southern something. And she worked in fruit and vegetable research, cut flower production, nursery production, and seed testing. She also worked as a supervisor of horticulture farming operations at Morehead State University in Eastern Kentucky, teaching students the fundamentals of floriculture, nursery production, orchard management, fruit and vegetable production, and landscape management. She holds a Bachelor's of Science in Natural Resource Conservation and Management and a Master's of Science in Plant and Soil Science in Horticulture and Nursery Production, both from the University of Kentucky. So she is well qualified to present today. And before we actually went live on here, her and I were talking about her background, and she has done a lot of traveling to actually see the industry. And so this is going to be a really fun presentation. I think we're really lucky to be able to have Amy join us today. So thanks so much, Amy. I'm going to pass this over to you.
All right. Thanks, Katie. Can you hear me okay? All right.
You're all good.
Great. Okay, well, let's get started. Yeah, as Katie said, I'm kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. I was really fortunate to have a really broad background in school, so it's been fun. And to be honest, cultivating cut flowers is probably one of my favorite areas of horticulture. So let's get started. Figure out how to change my slide here. And I'm going to go ahead and turn my video off just so that I can save some bandwidth, and we'll get started. All right. So for today's class, we are going to cover a lot of stuff. We're going to talk about some fun facts about the worldwide cut flower industry. We are going to talk a little bit about how cut flowers are grown commercially, because I think if you can see how they're grown commercially, then you can think, how can I put this on a smaller scale and grow something in my own yard? Then we'll go into cut flower gardening in Colorado specifically. So we'll talk about planning your cut flower garden, how to grow different flowers, what cultivars to select, or what different types of flowers to put into your garden. And then we'll talk a little bit about harvesting and then arranging at the end. As Katie said, if you have questions at any point in time along the way, just put those in the chat box to the Colorado Master Gardener, and Katie will get those over to me. All right, so we're going to start out with a little question here, and you guys can use the chat box to everybody to answer this. What is the top holiday for cut flower sales? So I'll give you just a minute to put your answer into the chat. We'll see what we think here. And this is all cut flower sales. And really, it should be all flower sales.
Okay, so I had it so people could only chat with me. So I am seeing some amazing responses.
All right, what are you seeing?
Mother's Day and Valentine's are coming up quite often.
Okay, good. All right. I'll give you just a few more seconds. Put your answer in. I think this is going to come as a surprise to a lot of you. All right, so it's actually Christmas and Hanukkah. So I know a lot of people always think it's Mother's Day. Mother's Day is kind of a US holiday, whereas Christmas and Hanukkah go worldwide. So it's actually the number one is Christmas and Hanukkah. A lot of that has to do with poinsettia sales. Those are not cheap, and people tend to buy those in bulk. So yeah, so Christmas and Hanukkah takes the cake. Mother's Day is actually a pretty close second, and they have a similar holiday in Europe called Women's Day. So if you combined Mother's Day and Women's Day, I bet it would trump Christmas and Hanukkah. So, but that's just kind of fun to know that most of our flower sales happen in December when things aren't growing. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the cut flower industry worldwide. So this is a huge industry. I don't think people realize just how much money is made in the cut flower industry. It's a $34.3 billion industry of revenue each year. There are over 15,000 retail florists and businesses in the US alone. For our country, where we're importing from, those are exported from Colombia mostly. So 78% of our cut flowers in our supermarkets or at your florist are going to be from Colombia. Christmas and Hanukkah, as we just mentioned, was the top holiday for flower selling at $2.28 billion. So lots of money made on that for that one holiday. And then, as I mentioned, Mother's Day, big holiday in the United States. 69% of the gifts on Mother's Day come from are flowers, and $1.9 billion is spent on flowers. It's insane. So a big, big industry. And I'm going to show you some slides in a minute to show you just how amazing it is when they go to sell these things. So let's talk about the top 10 countries that export cut flowers and how much money they spend on this. So the Netherlands, they export $4.5 billion a year, and they are definitely the #1 exporter. 48.2% of all exported flower bouquets come from the Netherlands. So they are definitely #1. Then you have Colombia, Ecuador, not too far, well, actually kind of a little bit farther behind, but still doing really well with $1.5 billion or $8.5 million a year. So those are big countries as well. Then you move into Kenya, Ethiopia, Belgium, Malaysia, Italy, China, Thailand. What you don't see on there is the United States. We just really aren't that big of a cut flower country. We buy a lot, but we don't produce a lot. I think that that's changed recently, you know, so a while, maybe back in the 70s, we were definitely exporting a lot more cut flowers than we are today. And a lot of that has to do with South America coming into the market. So I'm sure some of you have probably heard of tulip mania. This is, and I mentioned the Netherlands being the #1 cut flower country. This is pretty much the reason why. So tulip mania is a really interesting thing that happened in history. And let me just give you a little background. So it's the late 1500s, you know, things are looking pretty dire, and the Dutch decided to revolt from Spain. And so in the early 1600s, they started to establish this new country called the Netherlands. And at that time, they were creating the first capitalistic society. So this is also called the Golden Age. You might have heard that term. This is when Rembrandt was doing paintings. Vermeer, the girl with a pearl earring, that painting happened at that time. The Netherlands wrote their own Declaration of Independence, which our Declaration of Independence was actually mimicked after the Netherlands. It's kind of a fun fact. They also started the first stock exchange in the Netherlands. So lots of stuff was going on at that time. There were no aristocrats anymore because they had started this new capitalistic democracy type society. So they started to develop this middle class, a totally new concept. It was usually you had the aristocrats and then you had the poor. And now we've got this middle class that's building in the Netherlands. And so they're starting to have this expendable income that they've not had in the past. So tulips were started being exported out of Persia and into Holland, and people started to figure out that they grow really well in Holland. And so the tulip market just started to grow. The middle class were the ones that were buying these tulips with their new found income, and they were doing this as hobby gardeners. So like kind of on the side, they would grow some tulips in a bed and just for fun. They had lots of colors that were available to them, but there was this one tulip that started to pop up in a garden here or a garden there, and it had stripes, or it was called a flame tulip. So the upper right picture there, you can kind of see what that looks like. This became kind of like the prize tulip, the one variety, and I'm putting air quotes around variety. I know you can't see me, but the one variety that people wanted was this striped flamed tulip. So they started to sell this bulb. Um, it actually is not a genetic thing. It's actually a virus. So little did they know that these bulbs were infected with a virus that caused them to have that flamed look on their petals. It's not a benign disease. It actually, as that bulb creates new bulbs, each successive generation has a smaller and smaller flower bulb until eventually the flower is no longer existing. So, of course, they didn't know any of this at the time. So this one in the upper right-hand corner is called Semper Augustus, and it no longer exists because, again, this is a virus. It's not a genetic trait. The virus is still transmitted globally by aphids, but because the infection can cause so much damage to the tulips, there's been a lot of precaution to not let this virus spread around. So contemporary bulbs that you find that have a striped pattern to them are actually produced through breeding, and they don't have the virus. So back to the economics of all of this, like I said, lots of the middle class were using their newfound income to buy up tulips, hoping that they're going to get that one flamed tulip, kind of like finding the golden ticket, right, in your chocolate bar. So once somebody found that they had that tulip, then they wanted to sell that tulip. So they would sell it for a higher price to someone with more money. But the funny thing is with tulips is you can only harvest them after they've bloomed and they've started to senesce a little bit and die down. So when they find the tulip, it's maybe, April, late April, early May. They say, oh, I've got this striped tulip. Let me sell it to you. I'll sell it to you at, let's just say $5. But you can't have it yet because I can't dig it up until, say, September or October. But for now, I'm going to give you a certificate. So they would sell them an IOU, and then that person would sell that IOU for more money. And so they just kept selling these certificates for this one tulip to the next buyer and then to the next buyer. And so you can see in that upper left-hand chart there, the price of this one tulip, this Semper Augustus tulip, skyrocketed. And no one actually ever got the tulip because they were only selling this certificate. So this is actually the first, the first historical account of selling futures. This is what a future is in the economic market. So they're selling these certificates to the next buyer. They sell it for a higher price, again, never seeing the plant. And then eventually someone says, I'm not going to pay any more for this bulb. And that's when you hit the top price cap. And now they're left with these certificates for one tulip bulb that they have sold basically their entire life savings for, and no one's willing to buy it. So the price drops, and it dropped fast. And you can see on that chart that this all happened in basically within one season in 1637. The lower left shows kind of an example of all the things that one person would sell in order to get that one bulb, which is fascinating to me. So this was actually the first recorded economic bubble, which is interesting to me because this is the first capitalistic society. So there was a lot we can learn from this, especially today. But this is fascinating. I thought you guys might like this story. So that's how the Netherlands became the tulip capital of the world. They have just the perfect conditions for growing these. So I have a video for you. I'm going to show in a second, but these are some pictures from the Ellesmere flower market. This is the largest flower market in the world. I think the warehouse itself is the 5th largest building with a footprint in the world, as far as it's all one story and it's spread out really wide. But it's interesting to see these flowers and how quickly they move through this market and how they start to buy these things, how the buyers are working. It's kind of like a stock market situation. So I'm going to try to show you this video, and hopefully it works. We'll see.
The salty seabed soil, with a mix of rain, sunshine, and clever crop rotation, eventually becomes extremely fertile. One thing the polder soil grows particularly well is flowers. And here at the Ellesmere Flower Auction, it's clear. Flowers are big business in Holland. Visitors are welcome in this, one of the world's largest commercial buildings. They witness millions of dollars in the trafficking of flowers. In its auction halls, hundreds of wholesalers bid on trainloads of flowers as they roll by. To get the flowers out as fresh as possible, everything happens fast, including the bidding. A Dutch auction is speedy because the prices go from high to low. Batches of flowers are sold to the first buyer to press the button. Buyers must be lightning quick. It's the only way to sell so many flowers in one morning. Strolling the fragrant catwalk, it's fun to peer down on the action. They boast that fresh flowers go from cutting in the fields to flower shops anywhere in Europe within 24 hours. Workers scramble to get each buyer's purchase assembled on the train and shipped out. The Dutch are the world's leading flower exporters. 80% of these flowers are going abroad. Every day from this building, 20 million flowers are shipped, destined to make someone's day.
Great. All right. So Katie, how are we doing on questions? Do you have any questions right now?
We just have one that's pretty specific, so I think we can wait and save that for when you're actually talking about flowers.
Sure, great. So yeah, so this is and it's spelled Aalsmeer, Aalsmeer Flower Market. So I did take these pictures. This was probably one of the coolest places I've ever been, just to see how fast everything moves and how many beautiful flowers there are. Just fascinating. So another reason, like I said, you know, the Netherlands is like it's the best place for growing bulbs. They have really sandy soil, which is preferred, especially by tulips. They have pretty mild temperatures. They're on the coast. So they get that coastal kind of mild weather. And so this is Keukenhof. This is one of I think it's the largest tulip garden in the world. I'm sure it is. But they have just an amazing display every year of tulips. So this was in late May, and you can just see how everything is just perfectly in bloom. So if you ever get a chance to go to the Netherlands, Germany, Belgium, that area is kind of the place to go for cut flowers. So as time went on, so we have all this this concentrated market of cut flowers in the Netherlands. But as time went on, you know, with every industry, somebody else can do it cheaper, somebody else can do it better, and so the industry started to move worldwide. And South America is another really great place now for cut flower growing. It has an ideal climate, but then they also have things like lower labor costs and fewer regulations. Their high altitude can help because that gives you more sunlight. And these cut flowers, most of them love sunlight. It's also close to the equator, so you get that temperate effect. And they have predictable weather, something that we definitely do not have here in Colorado. And we'll talk about Colorado specifically here in a minute.
I wonder how climate change is also impacting the flower markets, you know, in the Netherlands.
I'm sure it is. You know, sea levels are rising. One interesting thing about this area in the Netherlands where they grow all these tulips is it's below sea level. So they've actually built a berm along the coast. So the ocean is higher than the land. And so, yeah, it's definitely something to consider. And then, you know, also with all of this COVID stuff that's going on, the flower market has taken a huge hit because a lot of people aren't having their weddings. They aren't having their any kind of ceremony, weddings, funerals, birthdays, things that you would normally have flowers for. And so, you know, hopefully they can get back to business soon. So specifically in South America, Colombia is dominant in the cut flower industry. They have about 16,000 acres under production. 65% of the cut flowers that are produced in Colombia get exported to the United States, Europe, and Russia. Again, most of them coming to the United States. I think I said 78% of our flowers come from Colombia. Half of the crops in Colombia are going to be roses, others are carnations, chrysanthemums. And you know, in the past, and I mean a little bit still, but Colombia had this reputation of being a hard, difficult place to do business because of violence and the drug trade. And a lot of the reason that the flower market has kicked up there is they're trying to find replacements for those industries. You know, let's get people into a more legitimate business. And so that's one reason we've seen Colombia take off as well. Another country that does really well in the cut flower industry in South America is Ecuador. Their growth started around 1991 with the Andean Trade Preference Act, again promoting legal industries, trying to help get some legitimacy to workers. They have about 15,000 acres under production, and they employ about 103,000 people, and they generate about $873 million a year. So in Ecuador, most of their flowers are roses. And they grow roses there because they have, again, just the perfect climate. The quality of roses from Ecuador is superior. They have very large heads, very long stems, which is great for cut flowers. The colors are much more vibrant, and roses are considered that luxury flower. So a very lucrative business for them to be in. So in the next few slides, and Katie, just let me know if there's any questions, because that's about it for the history portion of this talk. And then in the next few slides, I want to kind of just walk you through some of the different types of flowers and how they're produced commercially. So we'll start with tulip production, because we've talked about tulips with the Netherlands. So here in the United States, we do still produce some cut flowers. Again, it's not a huge industry, but we definitely have our winners. And Washington State is a fantastic place to grow tulips. They've got that similar sandy soil, that similar coastal climate to the Netherlands. And so you can imagine that it's just ideal. In the pictures here, so this is at Washington Bald in Washington State. I think it's just a little bit north of Seattle, about halfway between Vancouver, British Columbia, and Seattle. You'll find this place. And it's funny, they grow these kind of like they grow potatoes in the field, and they use a potato digger. So you can see that upper right-hand picture to actually pull these bulbs out of the field after they bloom. Pack them up, they ship them out. They grow some in the greenhouses as cut flowers. But I love the picture in the lower left. You can see that it says it's the right time for flowers, and they have their time and they have Dutch time, because these two, Washington State and Holland, are working very closely together with their tulip production and export and import and all that kind of stuff. So hydrangea production is another thing that we do see a lot in the United States, although not in Colorado. So hydrangea, the word hydrangea, the first part of it is hydra. Hydra means water in Latin. So something we definitely are lacking here in Colorado. So one of the reasons why we have some difficulty growing hydrangeas. Also, our soils are more alkaline, and hydrangeas prefer a little bit more acidic soil. If you're not aware, the blue color is usually from having an alkaline soil, and the pink color comes from having an acid soil. But there's breeding that's been happening. So a lot of times the blue flowers are bred to be blue. So it doesn't matter what the pH of your soil is. A lot of people really wanted that blue flower. So they made it happen through genetics instead of through how it acclimates to the soil. So things like Nico Blue is one that you've probably heard of. That's one that's genetically blue. So this is in Brookings, Oregon, kind of near the coast of Oregon. So we're moving south here. Definitely rainy all the time, or foggy and misty. So they have that water. they definitely have what it takes. So this is pretty cool. This is field production of hydrangeas, where they're just growing them right out there in the field. A little bit more hydrangea production in Oregon. This is a different company, but here they're growing them under cover. So they've got a shade cloth there. Notice that the stems on these are pointing a lot more straight up and down, and that's because they're really reaching for that sunlight. So I think that shade cloth that they have there is actually helping to get more upright plants, as well as helping with color. As Katie mentioned at the beginning of the class, right out of my undergrad, I started working at the horticulture research farm at the University of Kentucky, and my project was hydrangea production in what we call high tunnels with shade cloth. So one of the jobs that we had was, and this is, it's the best job ever. We'd go out in the morning, we cut hydrangeas, we'd bring them into the greenhouse head house, and we would use this color wheel to match the color of the flower bloom. That was my job. It was amazing. Didn't pay very much, but I really, really enjoyed it. So just know that there's a lot that goes into this. They want to know exactly what color that bloom is, so that when they market it, they can say, this is what you're going to get. Calla lily production is another thing that we do in the United States. So this is in Tillamook, Oregon. So Tillamook is the place of cheese, as you know, but they also have a lot of cut flower production all around that area. So this is a calla lily farm, and it's called Z Calla, again in Tillamook. And you can see, again, this is field production. So they've got these long rows of kind of it's like a raised bed situation where they've mounded up that soil to get really good drainage for these plants. But again, bulbs like sandy soil, very well drained soil. So they've grown these in the field up on these berms, and then they cut in the morning. This was really early in the morning, probably around like 7:30 in the morning. I say really early, that's, as a college student, when I was touring these places, that was really early. But you can see they're picking and they're harvesting, and they immediately go into buckets of water, and always in the morning, because that's the best time to cut. You don't want to be cutting your flowers in the middle of the day. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit. So again, also in the Tillamook area, this is another farm. This one is Asian lily production. So we've got bay lilies, which grow pretty well in a lot of different places. And then we've got Asian lilies. And Asian lilies definitely have more of the wow factor when it comes to cut flowers. You can see in the pictures, the beautiful colors, the flecking, the marks that they get in these things, all of that is done through breeding. And then just a side note, those anthers that you see on there have a lot of pollen, and that pollen can stain. So a lot of times when you purchase Asian lilies in the supermarket or from a florist, you'll notice that those anthers have been pulled off, just to kind of keep from that pollen staining your tablecloth. So moving out of the United States a little bit, I just want to cover a few more different crops to show you how they're grown. This is rose production in Germany. So this is actually the breeder. This is Cordis rose, and you can, in northern Germany, and you can see a little dish of flower pollen. And so this is where they're making new cultivars, new hybrids. And so they literally pollinate each rose by hand, just as you can see in that lower left-hand picture. So again, fascinating. It's amazing how much work goes into creating that one type of rose. Here's a few more pictures of that for you. Each rose in this greenhouse is a different breed, trying to get a different variety, and just beautiful. If they're going to grow these on, they would, as cut flowers, they could do this in the field, or they could do this in greenhouses. So rose production happens all over. But again, that market in South America for rose production in Ecuador is huge. Poinsettia production. So I know this is cut flowers, but this is that one flower that is a cut flower that you don't actually cut. Because if you've ever tried to cut a poinsettia, it has a lot of milky sap in it. It's really sticky. It's kind of elasticy, and it just gets kind of gross and gunky. So these are grown in pots. They're not actually cut. This is actually the greenhouse one of the 5 greenhouses that I supervised at Morehead State. And so we grew a whole greenhouse full of poinsettias every year. This was probably our biggest money maker, because you can start out, and it actually starts on the right-hand side of the screen, and it moves left through the production. But you start out with these cuttings, and by the end of it, you've got a $10 plant to sell. So the cuttings might cost you maybe 50 cents a piece. Altogether, you've probably got a couple dollars in each pot, and then you're selling them for a big profit. So not the easiest crop to grow. There's a lot of stress involved with growing poinsettias, because one, you start in August when it's super hot outside. Hence the shade cloth in the upper right-hand picture there that you can see kind of hanging down the wall there. So it's really hot in August in a greenhouse. So you have to start there. Then you have to take the shade cloth off, space them out, hope that the colors are going to change when they're supposed to, and that they're nice and full right at the end of Thanksgiving when everybody's wanting to buy their poinsettias for Christmas. So it's just a fun but stressful plant to grow. Moving back to the United States, here in Weld County, we actually have a lot of flower production going on. Dahlia production is huge here. So we've got this is a grower called Arrowwood Dahlia. It's in Platteville. And a few of us agents and coordinators took a little trip there last, I think it was in August. I could be wrong. Maybe it was, maybe it was July. But anyway, we went and toured this farm, and they do lots and lots of dahlias. Notice the coverings. So that's not for shade, that's for hail. We get hail in Weld County almost every time it storms. You can bet that someone's getting hailed on. So they grow these in these tunnels with that hail protection, and dahlias love it here. So if you want to grow something in your yard, dahlias would be a really good choice. You buy them as tubers that you plant in the spring. You get your blooms in the summer, and then you want to dig those up, bring them inside, and then replant the next spring. So they're not winter hardy, but they are they do well here as kind of treated as an annual.
What kind of fabric do they have over the dahlias?
Over the top. So that's
Yeah.
a hail netting.
Okay.
That's a hail netting fabric. Or even, there's been a lot of talk about hail protection lately coming across my email and from what I've read on Facebook and things. You can use shade cloth. 30% or less is usually not going to cause too much issue for your crops. But they also make specific hail netting. So I was able to find some on Amazon that I use for my little raised beds. So definitely, I recommend hail cloth. Something I never really thought of until I moved to Colorado.
And then I know when we were out there was, oh, you're going to talk about other varieties. I was going to say they have other varieties out there too. And I was wondering, a few questions have come in about what are some other good cut flowers for Colorado.
Yeah, and we're definitely gonna cover all that a little bit later. But they grow mostly dahlias at this farm. But they also had sunflowers, and then this next picture here, this is Lysianthus. You might also know this as prairie gentian. And this is one of their other greenhouse. This is kind of a different style tunnel. This one's a Gothic style. So notice the point at the top of the tunnel there. Just a different style. Kind of has to do with wind and things like that. But they're growing Lysianthus. And this is one of those that it's kind of, how do I want to say this? It's just not the shining star in your bouquet, but it's missed if you don't have it. It's one of those really great fillers and beautiful little blooms. And so Lysianthus is another one that they're growing there. Excuse me. So let's talk a little bit about Colorado's cut flower industry. So at one time in the late 1970s, Colorado was actually the #1 carnation grower in the world. So that's kind of interesting. I had no idea that was true. But what happened was Colombian producers in that late 1970s, the South American countries were trying to rebuild their economy, and they started to grow cut flowers, and specifically carnations. And they could grow them a lot less expensively than we could here in Colorado. And they didn't have the extremes that we have. There was just a lot less risk involved. There's a plateau near Bogota that has the perfect growing conditions. Also keep in mind that they're opposite of our season. So they're producing in the winter when we are not. And what happens in the winter? Valentine's Day. So, we got to get our carnations from somewhere. And carnations and Valentine's Day, I don't know. For me, I just equate those two things together really well. I feel like everyone gets carnations on Valentine's Day. We had some diplomacy deals that we were helping them with their industry, trying to help build their industry to try and lessen that cocaine trade. And so all of this led into market shifts. I've actually read that back in the day, there were some professors and some researchers from Colorado State University that went down to South America to help them build their industry. So yeah, little did we know that their industry would take over and ours would kind of fizzle out. But that's what happens. And almost any industry. Someone somewhere can always produce it cheaper, right? So as far as pricing goes, and I mentioned this a little bit with the poinsettias, you pay about $5 a stem for roses. So again, very luxury in terms of a flower, usually about 50 bucks for a dozen roses. Your florist pays about $2 for that stem. Your grower earns about 30 cents on each stem, and that worker makes about 4 cents on each stem. So your retailers and your florists are usually making a little bit more money, but they also have a lot more overhead, and they've got that artistic eye. So you're paying for that flower now as a form of art, not necessarily just for a flower. As far as other flowers in the business go, there are definitely those that are more expensive. So calla lilies, hybrid tea roses, hydrangeas, and a lot of the orchids are going to be $10 or more per stem commonly. Some of these hydrangeas I've seen are literally bigger than your head, and those are worth every penny of $10 just because they're so cool. Then the middle group is kind of those dahlias, the tulips, some more of the common orchids, peonies, things like that are going to be around $5 to $10 per stem. And then you've got your more common Asiatic lilies, Gerbera daisies, carnations, and gladiolas are all examples of things that you can get for usually around $5 or less per stem. But this is a lot of money. You can imagine just how much work goes into producing that flower, and then getting it to the market, and then getting it to the buyer, and then the florist using it. There's just so much involved. That flower touches probably lots of hands before it gets to you. All right, another question for you. Which month is National Rose Month? So I'll give you a second. Okay, if you've got any questions, just let me know. You guys can put your answer in the chat.
The chat has been very active. A lot of people chiming in on places they've been, and
Awesome.
And some tidbits about the Colorado market for cut flowers and things. But other questions have been related more to growing, and so I'll kind of hold those until more appropriate.
Sounds good. Do we have any guesses yet on which month is National Rose Month?
June.
You guys are right. It's definitely June. So you think June brides, right? That's the term. And that's the reason that that's the National Rose Month, is because that's when all the weddings happen. So just a little fun fact. All right, so now we're going to get into the more nitty gritty of what you guys are wanting to know. How can you guys do this on a smaller scale in your own backyard? So let's talk a little bit about how you can design that cut flower garden. So I always like to say, start all of your gardens with a plan. There's just a lot to think about, a lot to consider, and so you want to really think that through. You can use a mix of flowers for your current landscape, so you don't have to necessarily create these beds. You can just mix these cut flowers in here and there in your regular garden. Or you can create this working garden. So this more practical utilitarian layout is really helpful to have these long rows. It just makes harvesting easier. Some of these flowers are going to be taller than others, so it helps with sunlight. So that's one way you can do it. You can also do a small little raised bed planter type thing. So the picture in the lower right-hand corner is actually a shipping container that I got for my husband's work. And it's got plywood in it, so I didn't want to use it for food crops. So I thought, why not make a cut flower garden out of it? So I've got cosmos, sensation cosmos, and the giant zinnias growing in that. So you can even do these little containers as well. So you can use raised beds, you can repurpose things. The sky's the limit on this. You can really grow cut flowers in a lot of different types of situations. So as far as planning and prepping your cut flower garden, there's a few things you definitely want to try to achieve. You want to make sure that you choose a nice sunny site. As I mentioned, a lot of these flowers thrive on sunlight. That's why some of those higher plateaus in South America are so desirable for this type of growing. So good sunny site. You also need a well-drained soil. So make sure, like with the container garden that I started, it has holes drilled into the bottom of it. So we're getting really good drainage out of that container. When you're preparing your soil, especially if you have clayey soils, you want to add compost to that soil, even up to 8 inches deep, to really improve the soil underneath those plants. Some of these are not necessarily in favor of clay soils, especially those bulb type plants. And then here in Colorado, I think it's really important to try to provide some type of wind buffer. So for me and I have a very small yard. I think our whole lot is only 8,000 square feet. So where I've got my garden is in the corner of my yard where the fence is on the north and the east side of it, so that I'm getting some blockage of that wind. You can also plant some, evergreens if you've got more space to provide that wind buffer, or planting another taller crop like you can see in the picture here. They've planted a taller, I think those might be, it could be raspberries, it's hard to tell, but something taller on the windward side of that so that you get that buffer. All right, so you can group species of plants for different uses, and also for ease of harvest. So I like to put my tall types together away from where they might shade those smaller cut flowers. So in the pictures here, you can see there's coneflower. So there's one called mammoth coneflower that's really tall. I've got one of these in my front yard mixed in with my landscape bed, and it's about, I want to say it's like 3.5 feet tall. So really good size. Over on the upper right, you can see that's a snapdragon. And so I want to mention this because for some of these taller varieties, you can stake these and use this mesh netting to grow the flowers up through, and that kind of helps keep them from lodging and falling over. Another good thing to do when you're planning out that garden and where you're going to plant different things is to cluster things with similar requirements for sun, especially for water and drainage. And that's going to help really make your management easier. And again, this is, thinking from small scale up to large scale. As far as installing and planting those plants into the ground, I like the rows. That really helps with, just practicality of let's go harvest, everything in this little row here. But if you're going to do them like this, make sure that your rows are no wider than 4 feet. Because even with your taller ones, you don't want to shade the shorter plants, but you also don't want to shade the taller plants that are in the center of that row. So make sure that you're using a more narrow row. Maybe 3 feet is ideal for these. And just make sure that you're not shading things out. You can also do some companion planting with your cut flowers. So if you've got a vegetable garden already going and you want to just kind of pop some cut flowers in here and there, there's definitely some ways to do this. So you can put cosmos and cucumbers together. They do really well. The cosmos are going to attract bees, and they also attract green lacewings. And so that's going to help with pollination as well as pest control, because lacewings will eat some of those more, the bad pests. So lacewings are good. You can use lavender as a deer repellent. Although, I don't know how effective some of these things are as repellents. Some of the things you can buy on the market are probably a little bit more effective, but it doesn't hurt to throw some lavender in here and there and try to keep the deer out if that's an issue for you. You can plant with sunflowers. You can plant those to act as a trellis for other plants to grow up on. So you guys have heard of the Three Sisters. That's where you have squash, and you have beans, and you have corn. And in that case, the corn is acting as the trellis for the beans. But here you can actually use sunflowers and then cut them for cut flowers. Just keep in mind, sunflowers do attract squirrels. So if that's an issue in your area, maybe you want to skip the sunflowers. And then zinnias. You can plant zinnias and winter squash together. That's a nice combination, because zinnias you can actually cut the flower stem off at the base, but not be clearing a lot of the leaves. So you still get that coverage over the ground to act as weed control. So lots of options as far as companion planting goes. So to get maximum production, you want to plant your annuals, and then also, keep in mind there are some perennial cut flowers as well, but you want to be planting those based on bloom period, so that you're going to get cut flowers throughout the season, early, mid, and late. You can also do succession planting with these annuals. every couple weeks or so, plant another row, plant a few more sunflowers. Sunflowers is a really good one to do some succession planting with, because there are some varieties that are shorter in their maturity. And so, if you're planting every 2 weeks, you're going to get kind of a nice range that you can have blooms. Again, you can see in that picture, they've got that netting there, helping those plants to be stabilized. So when you're starting to choose which plants to go into your garden, you really want to choose things with long stems. 18 inches is really a good length as a minimum. A lot of these cut flowers will even go up to 3 feet tall, 4 feet tall. Some of the sunflowers, as you know, can get 6, 7, 8 feet tall. So think about that length of the stem. So you'll see things like something giant that kind of leads you to know, or like the mammoth coneflower, that's going to lead you to know that this is going to be a taller one. Also look for those everlasting flowers. If they're good for drying, they're great for cut flowers. One of the ones, and we'll talk about specific varieties here in a minute, but one of the ones that I have gotten in a bouquet one time was Status. And it was a deep purple color. This was at least, I'm going to say this was about 20 years ago. I still have a little cup of these flowers and they're still purple. So some of these cut flowers are fantastic, these drying cut flowers. All right, so let's talk a little bit about picking plants for your garden. So plant a variety of textures. You want to have some things with a fine texture, some things, maybe they look a little wispy, some things with a heavier texture, bigger blooms like roses. Don't forget the greenery, because that's definitely one of those things that makes a bouquet, but if it's not there, you do miss it. You maybe don't notice it, but you would miss it if it wasn't there. And the color, that's really a personal choice. For me, I like the blues. I like the greens and the pinks and the purples, and that's just my personality. You may be more into the reds and the yellows, and that's okay. Pick what you like, because if you're growing a cut flower garden, it's to enjoy the beauty of it. So that's all very, very personal. So as far as what you can use as cut flowers, there's lots of different plants that you might already have in your landscape that you never really thought of, that, oh yeah, I can use that for a cut flower. You can use annuals, perennials, you can use woody plants, you can use tree seeds, like in the upper left there, that's Hot Wings Tatarian maple, and I have actually thrown those into a bouquet before, and they make a nice little statement. You can use woody plants like the Kinsey's Ghost up there, the vining plant, that would work fine as well. You can use grasses, like the bottom, the blonde ambition blue grama grass, that would work as a cut flower. And the forsythia, although not blooming anymore, when that's in bloom, that's also a really nice, nice cut flower. And I don't have a lot more to say on woodies, so while we're on this slide, I do want to mention that, early on, before these things pop into bloom, you can cut them early, bring them inside and let them bloom indoors. A lot of these the buds will open up because of those warmer temperatures, and you'll get that full bloom. So forsythia would be one of those. If you're out pruning your peach trees or your apple trees, crab apples, things like that, you can cut those. When you take those pruning cuts, take those inside and let them bloom indoors. They're beautiful. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier about staking some of those taller cut flowers. Just keep in mind that, when these things get to be 2 to 3 feet tall, and we've got wind to deal with, this is where having that staking can really help. So you can see here, they've used that wire mesh. I also want to point out in this picture that they have landscape fabric down here at the bottom. So I know I mentioned earlier about, maybe that's in the next slide, about using mulch. You can also use landscape fabric in this case to help with the weed control. But yeah, definitely using stakes for those taller cut flowers is really helpful. You can use a tomato cage. You can use tobacco sticks and twine and just stake them individually. It's totally up to you. Just make sure you give them some kind of a boost. As far as irrigating your cut flower garden, you really want to avoid drought stress at all times. You don't want to skip a day or 2 days or let these things get stressed out. It's going to slow down your flower production, and a lot of times a plant will abort the flowers in order to save itself and put on more root growth or put on more leaf growth. So keeping it evenly, consistently moist at all times is really key. For a lot of these different flowers, you want to avoid overhead irrigation. So you're going to reduce a lot of the foliar disease that way. And then also, and it's not on here, but you want to irrigate early in the morning, giving that if you do overhead irrigate, giving that foliage time to dry out. So in the upper, or in the picture here, you can see this is a rose and it has powdery mildew. And that's one of those diseases that definitely kicks up a little bit if you're overhead watering. Some plants are more susceptible to these foliar diseases than others. You'll just have to get to know your different plants. I've got the cosmos and zinnias. The cosmos don't necessarily mind the overhead watering, but the zinnias from time to time their leaves can get some spots on them and things. So drip irrigation is great. Just again, make sure that it's nice and consistent. As far as fertilizing your cut flower garden, definitely you don't want to skimp out on fertilizing. Again, we're growing these for the blooms. So you can mix a granular, slow-acting fertilizer into the bed at the beginning of the season. So you can get like the Osmocote stuff that you just sprinkle in and just kind of work that in, the little granules. And that's going to give you some fertilizer over a longer period of time. It's not going to be a high amount though, a high dosage. So periodically then you can go in with a dilute dose, like a half or a quarter rate of liquid fertilizer, the water-soluble blue stuff. And you can actually spray that on the plant foliage, and that's going to help boost the energy in the plant, and especially of those heavy bloomers. And so you're going to get a lot better flower quality if you're using those foliar, light diluted fertilizer sprays. Again, do this in the morning before the foliage dries. Do this in the morning so that the foliage dries before the nighttime, because you don't want these things sitting wet overnight. Now, if you go out and you notice at the end of the day that you need to water, that's fine. If your plants need water, definitely give them water, but maybe try not to hit the leaves too much at that point in time. All right, so maintaining the cut flower garden. So I thought this slide was earlier, I apologize for that. So as far as weeding goes, you can put a 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch down. That's going to help with that weed control. It's also going to help reduce evaporation, therefore reducing the amount of water that you need to put on and preserving that moisture. This is, again, where you can use landscape fabric. You hear us agents a lot of times poo-pooing all over landscape fabric, but in a commercial system or in like a production type system like this, where you're trying to grow things for a flower, weed fabric might be good. You could try black plastic, but make sure that it's not going to cause too much heat for those flowers. That would work as well, though. Let's see. As far as picking your flowers, the more you cut these, the more production you're going to get. So when you have say a zinnia, and you harvest that bloom, you're actually going to initiate new flower buds, new stems, and that's going to give you more flowers. If you just leave that bloom on there, the plant's going to put all of its energy into that bloom, making it, prettier, but then also making it go to seed. And it's that seed production that takes a lot of energy out of the plant. So cut those blooms, bring them inside, enjoy them, and you're going to get more stems, more flowers, and your season's just going to last a lot longer. The same thing goes with your perennials. If you deadhead those, you're going to get blooms for longer periods of time. So always look for those faded blooms and deadhead those off. You can use pruners for things like roses. You can use your fingers and just snap off heads for things like zinnias or marigolds or cosmos, things like that. But I particularly like the pruners, and I like the really small pruners with a little scissor head on them. That really helps you get down in and get the exact stem that you're looking for. So yeah, so prevent those flowers from going to seed, cut them often, and you're going to get more and more blooms. So any questions, Katie, on production? Because I think from here,
Yes.
we're going to move into different types of flowers.
Yes, we do have some really good questions. So one about fertilizer. Do you recommend fish emulsion?
You know, I don't think there's anything wrong with fish emulsion. I think that's an okay fertilizer to use. Just look at the NPK, the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium level in that. Make sure that it's enough to give you good blooms. So yeah, I would say it's fine, but just make sure that you're getting enough from it. Usually your water soluble fertilizers are pretty accurate as far as how much of each nutrient you're getting. This brings up a good point though. There are fertilizers that have a little bit more phosphorus in them, and phosphorus does help with blooming. So you could, you know, so the beginning of the season, maybe do just the regular fertilizer, but then as these things start to really come into bloom, you could bump them up every now and then with a little bit of phosphorus, especially if you're growing in containers.
Perfect. How about flowers in full shade? Are there any flowers you know of that could be grown in full shade?
Yeah. Columbines can be grown in full shade. One thing I'll say about the flowers that are grown in shade for cut flowers, the blooms, they just don't last a lot of times, and this is a very general statement, they just don't last quite as long as some of the more full sun type flowers. But you could do columbine, you could do brunnera, you could do hellebores, the Lenten rose. Yeah, there's definitely some of the hydrangeas that do well here. So we've got the macrophylla type hydrangeas that I showed in the pictures, the blue and the pink. Those don't do so well in Colorado, but there are some hydrangeas that do better. So the Annabelles, the paniculatas, I've seen oak leaves being grown around, oak leaf hydrangeas. All of those would do okay. I don't know about full shade, but pretty good shade, and they'll do okay too. So there's a lot of things, yeah, that you could probably find that would do okay as cut flowers. They just might not last for 2 or 3 weeks like some of these others.
Do you know of any fact sheets or resources for, you know, good annuals, perennials, shrubs for cut flowers? Does that exist with CSU?
Yes. For CSU, I know we have a plant talk article, but I think that might be a little bit where the road ends for CSU. Okay. Definitely something that we should look into maybe creating. And maybe I just haven't seen it. But I do have one that I'll highlight here in a little bit from Illinois that has a lot of good care tips and how to grow. And now, granted, that's Illinois and we're Colorado. As far as plant selection goes, it may not be quite as accurate. But keep in mind, a lot of these are annuals, so you can grow them pretty much anywhere. So this is one of those things that you could probably cross-reference with other states and be okay.
Sure.
Except for the hydrangeas. You just can't grow the macrophylla hydrangeas. I mean, you can. They just take a lot of work.
Such a bummer.
Yeah.
They're so beautiful.
They are.
How about dahlias? When do you plant dahlias in the spring?
So I think those are usually planted. I know that our local community garden is planting those actually this week. So I would say late April, early May, until mid-May. You just want to make sure that they're not going to start growing before we have that frost. So you can get them in, I would say, no sooner than 2 weeks before the last frost. And that's just my total guess. I'm just like, you know, throwing that out there. I don't want to, it's not scientifically research based, but I would say May 1st to May 15th, you're probably okay. If you want to push it a little bit later, depending on where you are in the state, that'd be okay too.
Great.
Maybe up till June.
A few questions came in about peonies and when they bloom.
Yes.
And can you grow them in large pots?
Peonies. So actually we grew these at University of Kentucky along with our hydrangeas. We had a peony field. Peonies are great. And I was actually surprised to find out that you could grow them pretty well here in Colorado. In a container, I think you could do that, but just know that you can't leave that container out over the winter or they're not going to make it because the root system will end up freezing in a container. So maybe you could try to bring that container inside. You know, once it starts getting cold outside, bring it inside for the winter, put it in the garage or the basement, and then put it back out in the spring. You could definitely try it. I think peonies, though, prefer to be in the ground. And they, like I said, they grow pretty well here. They like a really well-drained soil, so I will say that. If you've got clay, I would definitely amend your soil with some compost. And then another thing about peonies is they can get powdery mildew. So another one that you want to try to water from below and not get the leaves wet too much. So yeah, I love peonies. And that's the lower picture that you can see right now on the right. Those are peonies.
Great. We did have a question come in about growing cut flowers at elevation, at higher elevation than we are in the Front Range. So someone who's on today is at Pagosa Springs at 8,000 feet. Do you have any references or resources or any thoughts about what would maybe do better at a higher elevation versus what you might avoid?
So what I would look for, and there's so many cut flowers out there, and I don't know if I can give specific recommendations, but I do think that you should look for those that bloom with a shorter period of time. So look at that days to maturity. I'm going to highlight a sunflower or two in a little bit that has a pretty short 50-day to maturity range. And so that would be something to definitely look for. But like I said, these are annuals. So if you can grow annuals at 8,000 feet, which I think you can, especially in containers, yeah, I think there's a lot that you can do at elevation. I went to Durango maybe a couple years ago and visited one of the stops on our tour. We did an agent tour. One of the stops was just a small 1/4 acre cut flower farm. This girl had this fantastic little garden, and she did all kinds of stuff. Now, I don't know the elevation of Durango, but I think it's pretty far up. It's pretty high, and tons of different options there. So I think you could probably grow almost everything that you could grow down here. Just make sure, again, that it's going to mature in the amount of time that you have. You might also, if you're going to start from seeds, I will say this with flowers. Flowers take a long time from seed for the most part. There's some quick ones like marigolds and zinnias and cosmos are all pretty quick, but some of these flowers take a really long time to grow from seed. So if you're going to do that and you're at higher elevation, start earlier so that you can get these things going so that when the weather does become favorable, you're ready to pull those outside.
Great. And several people just wrote into me that Durango's at about 6,500. So
so they're not that high.
They're actually not that high.
Yeah. But
it's funny how we think about elevation in Colorado.
And I am, like Katie said, I'm from the Midwest, so I'm still learning about Colorado and all the different places. But I think that there's definitely, though, a lot of options at elevation for sure.
Perfect.
And I love the sun, so that's a good thing.
Another question came in. Can you give some plant species for best everlasting flowers for the Front Range?
I will have a slide for that in just a few minutes.
I think we're ready to go then.
Okay, great. All right, so let's start out with those standout flowers, the big and the bold. Things like dahlias, so that's the lower left picture there. Cone flowers, super easy to grow. Those are perennials. Sunflowers, another easy to grow plant. Zinnias make great standout big bold flowers, and zinnias are pretty cheap, inexpensive, easy to grow. You'll see zinnias pop up again. I'm going to go into more detail on those. Celosia, this is a fun one. This is the upper left-hand picture. So this one's Celosia argentea. It's the one that looks like a chenille brain. I don't know how else to explain it, but it's just the coolest, craziest looking flower. But there's other celosias. There's coxcomb celosias that look more like a featherhead. So but what the celosias are great because they just have this really nice soft texture to them. So they're fun to pet those flowers. Black-eyed Susans, another perennial that can really make an impact in your bouquets. Gladiolas, that's the upper right-hand picture. Very, very commonly used in funeral arrangements. So you'll see that a lot with gladiolas. And and I haven't been there yet, but there is a cut flower farm in Weld County that's growing gladiolas. So that's my next stop. And I think Katie said she's going to tag along with me on that one. So I'm going to keep you up on that. Peonies. Again, love the peonies. If you have trouble, with roses, peonies are a nice alternative to that. They have that same kind of look, that same impact of flower. So really nice. Usually peonies, though, you're only going to find those in the pinks, purples, and whites. There's a few out there that are different colors, though. And then roses, of course, the one that everybody always thinks of when they think of flower arrangements. Some of the easiest cut flowers to grow. So this is a good place to start if you're new to this. Again, you see zinnia on the list. So the lower right-hand picture there. Zinnias are super easy. I'm growing so many zinnias right now. You can get tall ones. You can get, I'm growing one called Lilliput this year. It's about 2 feet tall. We'll see how that one goes. You can get single blooms, double blooms. If you don't know the difference between a single bloom and a double bloom, the zinnia picture there is a double bloom. It just has multiple layers of petals. Whereas the cosmos, just to the left of that, that's a single bloom, single row of petals. So zinnias are fantastic. Tons of colors, lots of different varieties, and they're cheap. Cosmos are great. These, again, usually come in the pinks, purples, and whites. I did try a variety this year called City Lights, or Bright Lights, I think it was called, and it was supposed to be red, orange, and yellow, but it did not germinate for me. So I will try those again next year. But cosmos are easy. I will say this, cosmos don't last as long in a bouquet though. So where you're gonna get, you know, a week or so, or even up to 2 weeks out of your zinnias, your cosmos just aren't gonna last that long. Sunflowers, another really great one to grow in Colorado. They do really well here. The one in the picture there is called Big Bear. So that's the upper right-hand picture. It doesn't look like a normal sunflower. These are called the teddy bear type sunflowers, which are just kind of interesting. I've got another whole slide on sunflowers shortly, so we'll go into more detail there. Snapdragons are another really easy one to grow. I will say this about snapdragons: if you're going to start them from seed, they're slow. They're just very pokey. I planted my snapdragons at the same time I planted my cosmos. My cosmos are already in my bed and they're about 1 foot tall. And my snapdragons are about a 1/2 inch tall and still waiting to be transplanted into 6-packs. So snapdragons can take some time, but once they start to take off, then they really take off. And there's some of these that are really tall. I've got another slide on that shortly too. Marigolds make great cut flowers. They do last a good amount of time in a vase. The problem with marigolds though is getting that height. So you might have to, do a shorter bouquet if you're going to do marigolds. And this, just as a side note, this brings up a good point since I'm talking about marigolds being really short. I recently bought some flowers at the local grocery store down the road, and it had some orchids in there. And the orchids were only like 3 inches tall. The little stem on it was so short, but they had stuck it into a little water vial and then put that on a stem. So they actually created the stem for the orchid, which is pretty cool. Another good, easy cut flower to grow if you're getting started is annual rudbeckia. And this is probably my favorite easy to grow cut flower because there's so many different kinds. They do tend to stick into that yellow or red category, but man, they're easy. They're easy to grow. And it's the annual rudbeckias. Of course, the perennial type are also easy to grow. All right, so let's talk in specific because I mentioned zinnias on both lists, easy to grow and making a statement. So here's some different varieties for you to try. Bennery Giants. So these are going to get to be pretty tall, maybe even up to, I'd say 2.5, 3 feet tall if they're happy. So that's the picture on the left-hand side there. They have double blooms, lots of different colors, just easy. In the middle there, you can see a state fair mix. These are going to have a little bit more smaller heads. Some of them might turn out to be not so double. Little, kind of like halfway between doubles and singles. They got maybe 3 or 4 rows of petals, but easy to grow, easy to find. I think almost every seed company sells state fair mix zinnias. Oklahoma mix, that's the one there on the right. Those have a really nice, very full double bloom, but they're going to be smaller. So only about 1 inch on the flower size there. So if you're looking for a smaller, petite zinnia, that's one to try. And again, there's so many other types out there. I have some called pinwheel. Like I said, I'm trying the Lilliputs this year. So zinnias are great, and you can just pop those around wherever you want to. You can grow them in containers. You can mix them in with your, your normal floral containers. You can put them in your garden. I work a lot with Treasure Island Garden in Windsor, and they plant them in a row along the vegetable garden, just all the way down the vegetable garden, bringing in those pollinators. That's kind of one of the benefits of mixing in your cut flowers. Those are zinnias. Snapdragons, as I mentioned, one of the easy ones to try. In the picture here, these are called rocket. These get pretty tall, 30 to 36 inches in height. So this is one you might want to use some staking with. Madam Butterfly is another kind to try. These have a lot of blooms. They're entirely double blooms, so very full blooms, usually in the shades of red, pink, purple, lavender, maybe some orange, yellow, and white ones too. But the Madam Butterfly ones are great. They're going to be a little bit shorter though, so only about 24 inches in height. So try some snapdragons. They grow well here. Sunflowers. So sunflowers are fantastic, but they can get tall. Some of the taller sunflowers, I have seen sunflowers that are 7-8 feet tall. So make sure that you really look at that before you make your selection of which one you're going to grow for a cut flower. I would not recommend growing like the mammoth sunflower. That the head on that is as big as your head, and so putting that into a flower arrangement would just dwarf everything around it. Those are more, used for the sunflower seed production anyway. But there are sunflowers that are specifically bred to be cut flowers, and one of those is the Pro Cut series. These are hybrid cut flowers, so they're being bred by two specific parents, and that gives you a certain offspring. With hybrids like the Pro Cut series, you can't save those seed and get the same thing back, so just know that. Sunrich is another good sunflower type to try. It has a non-branching habit, so you definitely get one flower per stem. They make excellent cut flowers. They're very reliable, and so a lot of our commercial growers will try the Sunrich series. These are also good ones to do in succession. So they don't take too terribly long to get to maturity, so you could plant some, wait a couple weeks, plant a couple more, wait a couple weeks, and so on. The blooms on that Sunrich series are about 4 to 6 inches in diameter, and they get to be about 48 inches to 5 feet tall. So keep that in mind, that they are on the taller side. Starburst Lemon Aura, I don't have a picture of that one, but that one's a nice light yellow color. So it kind of looks like that, that lemony color. Firecracker, that's in the picture there on the left-hand side. And then note that there are other colors out there. So Moulin Rouge or Chianti. So I have Chianti, I'm trying that this year. Those are types that you can get as well that have that deep red or maroon type color to them. So lots of different sunflowers out there on the market. And then I showed you that teddy bear one earlier on that has just a very unique look to it. Roses. So everyone loves roses, but they are expensive. Not to necessarily grow, but they're expensive to buy. In the picture here, you can see Always and Forever Red. That's in the upper right. The one below that is Peace. It has a golden yellow color, pink edges. There's a similar one called Sunrise Sunset that has a little bit more of an orange pink tone to it. You can find these in white, red, yellow, cream, coral, lots of different colors, usually more in the reds and the yellow tones. But there's also Veterans Honor, which is red, Henry Fonda, which is yellow, April in Paris has a creamy pink color, and then Sedona is a coral colored rose. These are all hybrid tea roses, different from your climbing roses or your, the miniature type roses are going to be different as well. Hybrid teas are in a shrub form. There's a lot of information about how to grow roses, specifically from CSU and other places. And if you have a chance to ever listen to Roger Hines, he's a master gardener in Larimer County. I don't even know, he might be on the call today. He's fantastic. And he used to work for Jackson and Perkins, which is one of the big rose breeders here in the United States. And he teaches our master gardeners how to prune every year. So yeah, so roses are fun. The only thing about roses is they've got thorns, and I'll talk to you in a minute about how to deal with those thorns. Someone asked earlier about flowers that last for a long time, those good dry flowers. And there are definitely good options out there. Flowers that last like this, these dry cut flowers, are some of the easiest ones to grow as well, minus the hydrangea on the list. It's always the exception. But yarrow, something that a lot of us have growing in our yards, can be used as a dried cut flower. Status, in the picture there on the right, you can see that the flower all the way to the right, it's kind of a magenta pink color. That's status. Kind of papery blooms. That's what I have that has held its color for 20 years. So in a little cup. So that's a really nice one to try. They come in pinks, whites, dark, like deep blues, and purples. Globe amaranth, or gomphrena, that's in the upper left-hand picture there. That is probably one of my favorite, easiest dried flowers to grow. Another one that will hold its color for years upon years. And usually those are going to be purple, but there's other colors that are coming on. There's one, I think, called strawberry that is a red color. There's whites and there's pinks. Baby's breath, one that we see in almost all of those bouquets that we would get. You can grow that pretty well here in Colorado. Globe thistle, another good one to try. There's some thistle type plants in that same arrangement there on the right-hand picture. Lavender. We have some lavender farms in Weld County. It's a great place to grow lavender because lavender likes it dry, and we have a lot of dry land. Lavender also likes it sandy. So if you have sandy soils, try some lavender. Celosia, as I mentioned, the one that looks kind of like the brain, the chenille brain, that's one that will keep its color and last as a dry flower for quite some time. Hydrangea, although and I tell you how much water it needs, and it needs all this water, and it's so picky, it actually dries really nicely. I had hydrangeas in my wedding bouquet, which I still have, and it's sitting in my china cabinet, and I got married 10 years ago and it's still looking okay. Straw flower. This is the bottom left-hand picture. This one is super easy to grow and lots of different colors and prolific bloomers. So you can get lots of blooms off of some straw flower. That one will wait though, and it will start blooming later in the season. Don't forget the foliage. So lots of different options out there for foliage. You can even, like I said, you can even pull stuff off of your woody plants that you have around your yard. So we use things like coral bells. I have some coral bells growing and throw those in. Coleus, a fantastic foliage plant. There's lots of different types of coleus out there. The CSU Annual Trial Gardens has a lot of different types of coleus that they grow every year. So I would encourage you to go check out some of those newer variety trials. Dusty Miller, one of the kind of standards of the annual garden, so that you can see that kind of right in the middle of the screen at the top there. Dusty Miller, kind of whitish leaves, kind of soft in texture, easy one to add in as a foliage plant. Peonies. So if your peonies don't get powdery mildew from getting too much water on their leaves, you can actually use the leaves as foliage as well. What I will say though is I would still strip the leaves off of the bloom, but then I would put those leaves in separate. So I wouldn't leave those leaves attached under the water. We'll get to that in just a minute. Sage is another good one, kind of an herb that you can use both ways. Lots of different ferns out there. The maidenhair is one of my favorites, but it's so delicate. Asparagus fern is very commonly used. Leatherleaf fern is another one that's commonly used. You can use hosta leaves. I'm going to switch to the next slide because I got a few more pictures here. You can see the coleus in the upper picture there. One of my favorites is this Bells of Ireland. It's an annual. You grow it just like an annual flower, but it gets these big stalks of these green space-looking flowers. They're just bizarre. They look alien-like to me. And then Salal, that's kind of that one that you see all the time in a lot of flower arrangements, a little bit woody in texture. There's some good ones that have great scents. If you're looking for that aromatic flower, of course, roses, like we mentioned. Sweet pea, that's the upper right-hand picture. That's a good one for a nice scent. Stock, that's the bundle that the girl is trying to hold there where you can't see, or maybe it's a guy, I don't know, but they're trying to hold that big bundle of stock. peony, lavender, freesia. Your lilacs can be brought in and used in bouquets to add that fragrance in your home, and then hyacinths. So lots of florals out there with aromatics. All right, Katie, we'll stop real quick. I've got maybe a few more slides. We might run a little over time, but are there any questions on specific varieties?
Yes, we do have a few questions. So the first one is general. Is it too late to plant cut flowers?
Nope, sure isn't.
Great.
Go for it.
And a question about, are you sowing seeds indoors or cold frame to get a jump on the season, or do you recommend that?
Yes, so I start indoors. Like I said, some flowers can take a really long time to germinate. So look at your catalogs, look at your seed packs, and find out how long it's going to take for that flower to germinate. Because like I said, my snapdragons it's been over a month since I seeded them into their container thing, and they're just now like an inch tall, maybe half inch. They're short. So it can take some time. So if you're going to start indoors, just know that you need time to do it. And then, you know, there's some downfalls of starting all these seeds indoors. I don't know about you guys, but I have fungus gnats like flying around my house everywhere. Here and there, not terrible, but there are some issues with that. So you can also start in a cold frame. I don't see any problem with that. But yeah, if you want to grow from seed, it's definitely a lot cheaper than buying plants.
Do you recommend drip irrigation for sunflowers, or is overhead watering okay?
For sunflowers, I always recommend drip irrigation. If you can do drip irrigation, I think it's great for almost any plant. It's always better to water the base and not the foliage. So I would recommend that. Can you water by hand? Sure. Maybe you just water at the ground. So.
What's the best way to protect roses at high altitude in the winter?
Oh, you know, it's a tough one. It's always a crapshoot whether your rose bush is going to come back every year or not.
I feel like that's just a common issue in Colorado in general for landscape plants.
Yep. I would definitely make sure that you're winter watering. So get out there every now and then, check on the rose, give it a little drink. And then this is something Roger will tell you, wait to prune. So we get anxious in the springtime, and especially we're going out there, we're pruning all these other trees and shrubs and things, and we want to prune our roses. But you really need to wait almost until frost has passed to prune your roses, because you can stress them out, and then we get that late freeze and it takes them out. So hold off on the pruning. That's one way to help protect them.
And someone said their sweet peas are only 2 inches high. Will it be too hot by the time they bloom?
It could be. You could try, in that case, you could try to put some shade over them, although I don't know if they're in a container or not, but if there's a way to shade them out, that can help. If they are in a container, move that container to the north side of your house or the northeast side, where they're going to get just a little bit of morning sun, but then they're going to cool off from that afternoon with the shade.
Okay, and someone else had a question about celosia.
Yeah.
They're about 3 inches tall, and she's experiencing some premature flowering.
Oh, yeah. So
she's been picking the tiny blossoms off. Will they mature normally? Is there anything else she should do?
No, I think she's doing the right thing.
Okay.
And that's kind of goes for a lot of these cut flowers. You know, when they're really short and they're starting to put on blooms, get those blooms off of there. That's going to help, you know, put that energy into growing that plant taller, and they'll set new blooms.
Perfect. That's it.
Okay. A few more slides to go. I apologize if we're running a little late. Let's talk about some tools for cutting your flowers. So it's really important to have a sharp knife or floral shears. That's the little pruners that you see in the picture there. I love the floral shears because you can really, like I said, you can really pinpoint where you're cutting and get just that one little stem. You can use bypass pruners. That's okay. You can use scissors, but just know your scissors might not cut through some of these when they get more mature. It's going to be tough to cut through, as some of the stems will get a little bit woody. The sharp knife is great. Just be careful that you don't cut your finger off. Always cut away from your body. And then have that bucket of water ready. You don't want to pick a bunch of flowers, set them off to the side, go pick some more, set them off to the side, and then they start to wilt, because they will wilt immediately, especially if it's later in the day. I prefer to cut in the morning. You can use flower preservatives. I've got a slide on that in a little bit. Have your vase ready as well, and use your artistic eye to create whatever you want. But again, the bucket of water and the sharp knife or floral shears are key. When you're cutting your flowers, like I said, you want to put them into that water immediately upon cutting. So what we would do when we would do hydrangea production is we would have just our normal buckets of water, and they only had about, I'm going to say about 3 to 4 inches of water in the bottom. You don't need to fill up the whole bucket with water, just enough to where that cut end is going to make it down. But be mindful as you pick more and more and you start to fill that bucket up, that if you have some with shorter stems and you're poking them down in there, make sure you're getting that cut end all the way down to the bottom so that it can get that water. Once you've cut them, you can put them in a cool room overnight. A lot of these floral industry places, they have rooms that are coolers. So they just bring them into the cooler room. And if they're in those cooler temperatures, and even room temperature, they can last up to 2 weeks. And we'll talk about preservative too, that can definitely help with that. So when you're cutting your flowers, like I said, cool mornings. You can do early evening, but I find morning is better. And when you start to do the arrangement of it, do it inside where it's nice and cool and shady. It's better not to arrange the flowers outside in the sun because they can just start to wilt. You want to make sure you're always stripping off the lower leaves. With things that have really soft stems or soft leaves and petioles, you can just use your hand and just wrap your hand around the stem and then give it a quick yank all the way down the stem, and you should be able to pull those leaves off. Don't do that with roses because of those thorns. In that case, you definitely want to use your knife. Your really sharp, like a paring knife is great. You just hold the rose kind of right in front of you and cut right down that stem really quick away from you. And then you can strip off those thorns that way. You can also get one of these handy dandy thorn removing tools if you prefer. So this is that fact sheet I was telling you about from Illinois. Just a really nice synopsis of how to care and deal with cut flowers and foliage. I just find this one really has a lot of great information and it's easy to understand. So I will, at the end of this, when I send out the slides, I will make sure to send this as well.
We have one question that came in about, are there any good native plants that could be used as cut flowers?
Oh man,
that's a tough question.
Yeah, and you know, being a non-native,
right?
And I'm still trying to learn a lot of the natives. So let me think about that one. But yes, I'm sure there are. There's just so many things that make good cut flowers. All right, let's talk a little bit about floral preservatives. You can get this stuff at flower shops. You can get it at nurseries. If you buy a bouquet from the grocery store, there's usually a little packet inside the bouquet. But you can make your own of this stuff as well. You can, and I don't think these are research-based, but I'm gonna throw them out there. You can use a recipe with 1 part lemon lime soda, like Sprite or Sierra Mist. Put that with 3 parts of water and a little 1/4 teaspoon of bleach, and that can really help your flowers last. I was actually told about the lemon lime soda thing 20 years ago. So by someone who was in the floral industry. So it's not research-based, but I would definitely recommend that. You can also do one with 2 tablespoons of lemon juice, a tablespoon of sugar, and a 1/4 teaspoon of bleach, and a quart of warm water. And that's another way to help preserve your flowers. And that's just, I mean, it kind of acts, it's got sugar in it, and the flowers like that sugar. Aspirin and vinegar have not really been found to be very effective. So if you are, you know, you may have results with it, but it's just not scientifically showing much promise.
What about a penny? Have you heard that?
Yeah, and I don't know.
Right.
You know,
if it makes you feel better.
Throw it in there and make a wish, and that will be better. All right. Quickly, dyeing flowers. So this is not my cup of tea. I personally do not like dyed flowers. I loathe them, but that's okay because some people really like them, and that's fine. I think flowers are beautiful enough on their own. Why do we need to add dye? But this is I will say this is a really fun thing to do with your kids though. So if you have kids and you want to try some flower dyeing, and now's a great time, we're all looking for those projects, right? You can put some food coloring in a vase, about 10 drops, and then carnation. Go get some white carnations, and they will pull that water and that dye up really nicely. So you just cut the stem, put it in the water, wait a couple hours, and then you have different colored flowers. So it's a nice little teaching lesson, especially like I said with kids. You'll teach them how flowers take up water and move it around the plant. All right, we're almost done. A few flower arranging tips for you. You know, this is super subjective, and you can arrange flowers in so many different ways. I went to a wedding one time, and they just had 2 ginger flowers in a vase, and that was their arrangement, and it looked beautiful, but it was, you know, very simple. But you can mix different colors, or you can go monotone. Think about things like, how is it going to be viewed? Do you want a 360 design, or do you want it to just be viewed from one side? Make sure you've got different lengths, different heights. Notice the upper right-hand picture there. They've got lots of different orange roses, but they're all kind of at different heights. So make sure you're getting some levels in there. Again, always remove all the foliage before you put those stems down into the water, because it can just cause rot, and the stem can get rotted, and it can get gooky and gumpy and yuck. Don't forget your fillers. They act as a neutral. Let's see, have a focal point. So the lower right-hand picture, you can see they put a little bird in there, a little cardinal bird, to just kind of draw your eyes, you know, to the center of the vase. Maybe it's the sunflower, like in the upper picture there. Maybe that's the one that's going to be like, that's my showstopper for this, this arrangement. So have a focal point, create movement, put some sticks in there, put all kinds of stuff, maybe some Tatarian maple seeds, like I mentioned, from your tree. It's just really the sky's the limit. There are no rules. Use your instinct. If you like it, that's all that matters. All right, so that's what we've got. So any last questions, Katie? And I'm
Thank you so much, Amy. We have one question that has not been answered, and that is, do you have any experience with moisture meters or sensors in the soil for growing cut flowers?
I mean, I don't know if I use, how do I answer that? Yes. You can use a soil moisture meter to always check your soil moisture in your vegetable garden, in your flower garden, around your trees. You can use those in, you know, multiple different ways. That's just going to really clue you into whether or not your soil is consistently moist. So yeah, for sure. Go for it.
All right. Hey, thank you so much. We're getting a lot of positive feedback. We'll hang on for just a few minutes for anyone else who wants to ask a question, but thank you so much, Amy. This was wonderful.
You're welcome.